Insert your name here and the Argonauts. Oh, this is such a silly title. It's so silly that actually I'd seen this game on Board Game Geek a couple of years ago as during one of my occasional print and play binges. When I go on Board Game Geek, I look for geek list of small portable solo print and play games, and I just start printing an inordinate amount of these games. This one looked good, but I thought a game the title's so silly. Oh, come on, can this game be good? And then I read some comments that said that the game was actually good, and I thought, oh, whatever, I'll just pretend in my head it's called the Argonauts. And then the game, of course, becomes attractive because I've always been fascinated by Greek mythology. To me, that is the original fantasy. If nothing else, for me, it was the first fantasy that I ever read. Of course, for the Greeks, it wasn't fantasy. It didn't have the same role than the Lord of the Rings has in our society. But for me, as a kid growing up in the late 20th century, I wasn't a kid anymore in the 21st. Growing up in the late 20th century, I read those stories of ancient mythology before I read fantasy, and I was so fascinated, and it gave me the same type of fascination that later in life fantasy would give me. Travels, adventures, perils, fights, monsters, treasures, magical items, challenges, duels, all the good stuff. Of course, the Greek myths also are a little bit disturbing at times. They're just weird things that what? Did he really do that to his mom and that other stuff? Yuck. And some of many of the fantasy things that we have nowadays is pretty much Greek mythology themes with a more modern ethics that we understand. The Greek myths we don't understand, which, by the way, doesn't make them any less fascinating. If anything, there is a mystery to the impenetrability of some of these stories. But I digress. Insert your name here, and the Argonauts is a free print and play game where you play the role of Jason of the Argonauts, or Marco of the Argonauts, or Brandon of the Argonauts, or Gland of the Argonauts, and you're leading the Argonauts. You're leading this group of brave heroes that will face a lot of monsters and perils and will die horribly, many of them. There's just no way. The man that you travel with, or the resources in this game that you're throwing at the monsters to increase your chances of surviving against the monsters. So some of these people will get eaten. Which is very in line with the original theme, actually. That's precisely what happens when the ancient heroes are like, oh, come on, my dear friend, why don't you go and see what happens there? Oh, you got your head eaten by a monster. How peculiar. So, it's in line with the theme. It's this travel, this adventure, in which loosely covers the legs of the trip of the Argonauts in the classical myth, but also it adds other elements. So it's more of like a fantasy hypothetical journey in a fantasy mysterious land populated by monsters, creatures, and encounters of classic mythology. Again, many of these things really are strictly tied to the myth of the Argonauts, but not all of them. Let me show you how the game works. The game includes a deck of standard cards that you use when you start playing the game. Your first game, you will have a starting deck of 30 cards, and then there is a deck of reserve cards marked with the R symbol. These are added game after game if you're playing the campaign game, which I think is really what you should be doing. I would say this is a game in which the campaign game is kind of the standard game. The game tries to capture the idea that these old ancient mythical stories have been retold many times, and every time that the story is retold, it's changed a little bit. So you go through your first game using a deck of 30 cards, and at the end of that game there will be conditions that will modify the next time that you play the game, will modify your deck, and some of the modifications include the fact that new cards in the reserve deck will be added based on some events that may or may not have happened during your game. But let me tell about the basic idea, then we'll talk about what happens after your first game and between games in general. So you need your standard deck of cards, which is 30 the first time you play the game, reserve cards. You have an heroic deeds card, which is used to keep track of modifications that apply between games, and then you need 12 tokens of any kind to keep track of the number of people that are still alive. These represent the starting Argonauts that are traveling with you. Now, gameplay is super simple. At the beginning of each turn, you will simply draw 3 cards. That simple. Cards with a purple or pinkish top are monsters that you will have to face. Green cards are treasures that you can gain. Monsters and treasures have 2 stats, a difficulty level and a deadliness level. Well, treasures don't have that. The treasures only have the difficulty. They are not deadly to you. The point is that you draw the cards and then you will assign your Argonauts to the cards that you have. You assign them to perform tasks for you. The more Argonauts you send to perform a task, the more chances you will have that they will perform it successfully. And you can send them to any and all of your cards. You do not have to send them all. And what happens is after you have assigned Argonauts to your cards, you had to resolve them. For the monsters, you had to fight them. So you roll a d6, you add the number of Argonauts that you have. You may also have other modifiers that come from treasures or other special abilities that apply. Once you have applied all the modifiers, the biggest one of which being the number of Argonauts, if you have equaled or exceeded the difficulty number of the monster, then you had defeated the monster. Now, when you start playing the game, all of these boxes will be empty, blank, and only one will already be crossed, which is checked by the designer, I guess. When the card comes out of the printer, that one is checked already. To determine the difficulty of the monster, simply you look at the rightmost box and you look down. In this case, the difficulty is 7, the deadliness is 1. If this was the last box, so if this box here is checked, then the difficulty is 8. I need to roll a total of 8, modified 8 to win, and the deadliness would be still 1. Here, the difficulty number is a little lower, it's back to 7, but the monster is now much more deadly. As you have imagined, as you're playing multiple games, in game after game, these monsters become tougher, and you record that by checking the boxes. So if you succeed, if you rolled a number that is high enough, I have 4, I had sent 4 Argonauts, the difficulty number was 7, I win. So you get your Argonauts back and you put the monster in a special pile that's called the victory pile. If you fail, suppose that here I had rolled a 1, ouch, I get my Argonauts back, but not all of them, because I had to lose a number of Argonauts equal to the deadliness. Here the difficulty was 9, deadliness 1, I lost an Argonaut. And then for the treasures, if you succeed, you find the treasure. If you fail, then you simply lose the treasure. And I failed in this case. But suppose I had not failed, then I would take the treasure and I could use it whenever the conditions described on the card apply to implement the effect described on the card. Monsters that you do not defeat, treasures that you do not find, or single-use treasures that you have used go in another pile, which is the discard pile. It's important that you keep victory pile and the discard pile separated. So the point is that at the end of the game there will be a victory pile that will have recorded the monsters that you had defeated and the items that you still have at the end of the game. It's pretty simple. As you can imagine, the idea is that as you progress, these monsters will take a toll on you. The number of Argonauts will be reduced because occasionally you will lose a fight or just game effects that will force you to lose Argonauts. So the number of people that are traveling with you is reduced. The challenges become tougher, but maybe you have found some special items that will allow you to do better stuff to help your odds. So there are various wrinkles to this. Some cards are blessings from the gods, and if you have a blessing, that simply means that you are catching a breather, the gods are giving you a break. It means that the card does nothing. Now this turn, I only have 2 cards that I need to deal with, to negotiate, and that means, of course, that allows me a better concentration of resources. My Argonauts only have to be sent to 2 cards, to be spread between 2 cards instead of 3. Other cards may bring you negative effects. And the Hades' Wrath is one of those. Well, the God's Wrath. There are several Wrath from the Gods cards which are added to the deck after your initial games. And what a Wrath card does simply means that you immediately have to drop 2 extra cards. The Wrath card doesn't have an effect per se, but for the fact that it forces you to draw an extra card, which means that turn you will have to deal with 4 problematic situations. So even if it's not for a problematic situation, if some are treasures, it's still bad to have 4 of them, because it means you have less chances to find those treasures. The basic concept is pretty simple. Each turn you keep drawing 3 cards, send your Argonauts, resolve, repeat, and if you manage to go through the entire deck, then you have won the game. Of course, you can do that if you have at least 1 Argonaut that is still alive. If you lose all of your Argonauts before you have gone through all of the cards, then you have lost the game. If you win the game, there should be a pile of monsters here. I'm just kind of randomly look for some. And there should be a bunch of monsters in the victory pile, and most likely also treasures. Things that are in the discard pile are in the discard pile. Things that are in the victory pile, if you're playing the campaign game, you need to go through and you need to put a marker on the leftmost box that is still empty. Which means the next time that you will use that card, the difficulty number will be higher. Treasures are harder to come by, and monsters are harder to defeat, or they have a more deadly rating, like you would see here. But there are also cases, and this is super interesting, when you mark certain boxes, when you defeat the monster and you mark certain boxes, you trigger an add effect. In this case, when you mark box 3 and 5, you add these things. You have these indicate cards that you add from the reserve deck into the main deck. So if I killed Kidas 3 times, now Poseidon is kind of annoyed that I keep attacking and winning against marine creatures, and so now I had to add the Poseidon's Wrath to my deck. For that moment on, every time I try the journey, Poseidon will be annoyed at me. And remember, this only applies when the card is in the victory pile. So maybe there's a case where I'm like, I don't really want to trigger that condition for next. I'd like to gain some benefits first and become a little stronger. So maybe this time I will take the hit so that the monster doesn't level up because I have put it in the victory pile. This also is a card that adds monsters, harpies, and more harpies. They're just effects of this kind, which are really cool because it simply means that you are getting some gods to hate you, and so in following games they will be harder on you. Some new monsters will show up. Luckily enough, you also become stronger, because at the end of a successful mission, you get the Heroic Deeds card, and you can mark one of these boxes and gain the corresponding advantage. If you mark this box, you get the starting crew. If you mark this box, you get Apollo's Blessing or Zeus' Blessings into the deck. Some of these benefits, as you can see, take multiple marks to earn. So to get an extra starting crew after the first one, you need 2 Heroic Deeds. There are also other card and game effects that will allow you to gain extra Heroic Deeds, but mainly you gain them from completing a mission successfully. So this is the idea. You can play a single game with a deck of 30, or you can play a campaign game maybe over a couple of sessions, and you win the campaign game when you have marked all of the boxes in your Heroic Deeds card. This game is good, really, really good game. I enjoyed my first game, but I was already excited as I was playing the first game to play the second. And as I played the second, I was excited to play the third. This idea that the game grows with you really is a big element, is a big component. I almost say you really should not think of each game as an individual game, just as rounds of a larger game, and the game is the campaign. Because if you keep that in mind, then you will find yourself doing certain things during the game, thinking ahead of how to manipulate certain things, how to prevent certain monsters from leveling up. There are even some game effects that will allow you to do so. So, for example, there's a particularly nasty monster which is going to be really terrifying if that monster levels up next game, but I don't want to be defeated because the effect of being defeated by the monster is nasty too. So look for a magic object that will allow me to prevent that monster from leveling up. I will choose my own upgrades in certain ways, and I really like how the game challenges you more and more as you go along with the campaign, but part of the game mechanics are precisely how to deal with that, how to stay abreast of the way in which the enemies will develop, how to always be a step before them, which is very hard to do, at least not to be left behind, that your team is still weak as they are terribly powerful against you. So really the linking of the stories, so the repeating of variations of the same story really is interesting, is really part of the game experience. And I like how thematic it is, how certain gods will start liking you or hating you, and that is so in line with the theme. A certain aspect of randomness also to me really works with the theme, because again, as I said in the introduction, there is so much mystery in the world of Greek mythology. There is the idea that the gods do whatever the heck they want, and the world is this big scary place in which you're trying to do your thing and you're not in control really of anything, because fate and the gods determine stuff, and yet you should try to do your best. I like this. I like this very much. Push your luck game in a sense, yes and no, because the game, you push your luck in the sense that you decide the odds that you want to have in certain situations, but this fact that you can assign the Argonauts to different tasks or not assign them to tasks at all, you can choose to assign a lot of Argonauts to a single task, ensuring that you will succeed, and then knowing that you will almost automatically fail the other tasks. That's a powerful decision. That's an interesting decision. It's, if you want, is the basic omnipresent idea of roll against a target number, apply modifiers, and see whether you succeeded or not. But the fact that you have a set of tasks that is presented to you simultaneously, and you choose how to assign your resources, therefore you choose how your modifiers are going to be, and therefore you choose basically your target numbers, because of course that is the modifiers affect the actual target number. It could be 6, but you have 2 guys there. It's as if the target number was 4. So the fact that you can choose these and manipulate these, and it's up to you, it's part of the decisions that you make. To me, this makes the game very interesting. Gameplay wise, it's a very interesting decision that you have there. So it's good. It's really good. At the core, that's what is interesting about this game. Deciding if you want to go and kill monsters or expose yourself to the danger of being defeated by monsters, but then you can grab more treasures. If you want to fight a certain monster, then you will win against that monster now, but a god that protects the monster will be mad at you in following games. So it's about manipulating your odds of doing certain things. So gameplay wise, it's pretty solid. It's a very solid design. At the same time, it's thematically really engaging, because it does tell you a story that is set in the mysterious and fascinating world of Greek mythology. You have definitely a thematic atmosphere in there. Both when it comes to a single individual game and this idea that that the things that you did before haunt you in the future. That also is very Greek mythology of the game. So your name here and the Argonauts, I would say it is a game that has the best ratio I've ever heard between how silly the name is and how good the game is. Or I should say, the silliness of the name is directly proportional to how good the game is. It's a really, really silly name and a really, really good game. Absolutely worth printing, making, and playing, and try the campaign game immediately. Get in the mind frame that the campaign game is the game, the single missions are rounds. If you feel that playing a full campaign in a single session is too repetitive, then simply break it into multiple breaks, into multiple filler occasions, into multiple lunch breaks, because this is a game that you can keep with you, you can carry with you, and you play around. And it's really exciting when at the end of a certain round, a certain mission, you know what kind of new things you will have to face, and you see how the deck has grown. And of course, the deck also becomes more challenging because it's thicker. It's really exciting and fun to see that. At the end of a mission, very often I found myself looking forward to the next one because I wanted to see how the new monsters and the new gods hating me would affect me. So definitely a good game. Another great find in the long list and sometimes confusing list of Board Game Geek. The Geek list about free print and play solo games, but I'm glad I took the time to make this game because I really had a good time playing it, and I hope that you will give this game a try too.